Papa Josiah. The voice thundered across the compound like lightning striking dry ground. Every soul in that place froze. The Chinese businessman stopped talking. The gateman dropped his broom. Even the crickets went silent. Obinna Okafor, one of Port Harcourt's wealthiest men, pointed his finger at his Range Rover, then at his wife's father like he was pointing at a diseased dog. "You see this goat mess on my car? Go inside, find bucket and sponge, and wash it. Now." Nkechi's heart shattered into a million pieces. Not again. Not in front of these strangers. Not her father. This was the third time in 2 weeks that her husband had humiliated the man who raised her with love and dignity. But before I tell you what happened next, what happened that changed everything, please subscribe to the channel to stay updated with beautiful African stories. Because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your bones. My children, let me tell you about Papa Josiah is. This man was something special. For 35 years, he worked as a court clerk in Umuahia, Abia State. And in all those years, do you know what made him famous? He never, and I mean never, collected one single bribe. While his colleagues built mansions and sent their children to America, Papa Josiah lived quietly in his small house. His wife would joke, "Josiah, are you sure you're working in the same Nigeria as everyone else?" But the man would smile and say, "My dear, integrity is more valuable than gold." After retirement, Papa Josiah thought his struggles were over. He received his gratuity and pension, small money, but enough to live peacefully with his beloved wife, Mama Nkechi. He even opened a tiny provision store, selling biscuits and soap to neighborhood children. But life had other plans. Mama Nkechi started complaining of stomach pain. Then back pain. Then she couldn't sleep at night. When they finally went to the hospital, the doctor's words hit them like thunder: kidney disease. Stage 4. She needs immediate treatment. Papa Josiah watched his life savings disappear faster than water in desert sand. First, he sold his land in the village, 800,000 naira. When that finished, he borrowed 400,000 from relatives who looked at him with pity. When that wasn't enough, he sold his late father's fishing boat, the only thing connecting him to his ancestors. 2.3 million naira. Everything he had in this world. But after 3 months of hospitals, injections, and false hopes, Mama Nkechi closed her eyes forever. Papa Josiah didn't just lose his wife that day. He lost his savings, his peace, his future. He was left with nothing but a leaking roof and empty provision store. Some nights, Nkechi would call him from Owerri, and she could hear him crying softly. Not loud crying, the quiet kind that comes from a broken heart. The man who had lived honestly for 67 years was now eating gari once a day. Sometimes no food at all. But even in poverty, Papa Josiah never stole. Never cheated anyone. Never used his suffering as excuse to become wicked. That's the kind of man Obinna humiliated. That kind of man. Nkechi met Obinna at a business seminar in Owerri. At 26, she was working as secretary in a small accounting firm, earning 45,000 naira monthly. She would send 20,000 to her father and somehow survive on the rest. Obinna was 38, loud, and impossible to ignore. He drove that Range Rover with license plate Success 1. He wore Italian suits that cost more than most people's yearly salary. When he spoke, everybody listened, not because he was wise, but because money has its own voice in Nigeria. He pursued Nkechi like a hunter chasing wounded antelope. Expensive gifts every week. Cash transfers that made her colleagues jealous. But something in his eyes made her uncomfortable. The way he looked at her, like she was property he wanted to purchase. For months, Nkechi said no. She barely knew this man, and what she knew, she didn't like. But then Obinna played his final card. The card that broke her resistance. Let me take care of your father. Those 6 words changed everything. Every night, Nkechi closed her eyes and saw Papa Josiah sitting alone in that dark house, eating once a day, crying for his dead wife. The thought made her sick. Against every warning in her heart, she whispered, yes. The wedding was magnificent. Governors came. Musicians flew in from Lagos. 3 types of jollof rice. People talked about it for months. But what they didn't know was that Nkechi had just sold her soul to save her father's life. At first, it seemed like answered prayer. Papa Josiah moved to Port Harcourt into a beautiful room with steady electricity and running water. For the first time in years, he looked healthy. Obinna even introduced him proudly at the wedding reception. This is my father-in-law, a retired government worker. People clapped and praised Obinna's generosity. But slowly, like poison mixing with water, Obinna's true character began to show. It started with small comments. Little cuts that seemed like jokes but left wounds. Papa, please don't touch my sound system with those rough hands. Use the plastic chair, not the leather one. That one is imported. Nkechi thought he was just being careful with his expensive things. But the comments grew sharper. Crueler. The worst moment came during an Arsenal football match. Obinna had invited his wealthy friends, men in designer agbada who threw money around like confetti. They filled the living room, laughing loudly and drinking expensive wine. Papa Josiah sat quietly in one corner, watching the match with innocent joy. When Arsenal scored, he jumped up instinctively and shouted, "Go!" The room went dead silent. Obinna turned slowly, his face dark with embarrassment. "Papa, are you okay? Since when do you watch football with big men? Obi, you don't forget your level." His friends exploded with laughter. Some of them fell off their chairs, pointing and giggling like children. Papa Josiah's face, his face flooded with shame so deep you could feel it across the room. Without saying one word, he stood up and walked quietly to his room. That night, Nkechi cried in the bathroom until her eyes were swollen. Her husband snored peacefully in their king-sized bed, completely unbothered by the pain he had caused. But this was just the beginning. 2 months later, Obinna invited Chinese investors for business dinner. He wanted to show them his wealth, his success, his power. Everything was prepared perfectly. Cars polished. Garden lights tested. Expensive food ready. Then disaster struck. A neighbor's goat wandered into the compound and rubbed its dirty, wet body all over Obinna's pristine white Range Rover. Muddy streaks covered the door like ugly scars. Obinna's face turned red with fury. He screamed at the gateman. Screamed at the maids. Then his eyes landed on Papa Josiah, who had stepped outside to greet the visitors. Something wicked possessed Obinna in that moment. "Papa Josiah, come here now." The old man hurried over, confused. "Yes, my son." Obinna pointed at the dirty car. "You see this nonsense? Go inside, find bucket and sponge, and wash this car. Now." The entire compound froze. The Chinese investors looked at each other, shocked. Nkechi's heart stopped. "Obinna, Shut up, he snapped. Then turned back to her father. Or are you too old to wash car? Abi, you don't forget how to walk. Papa Josiah looked at his daughter, tears filling her eyes. Looked at his son-in-law, contempt filling his eyes. Then quietly, he nodded. No problem, my son. Under the evening sun, in front of foreign strangers, Papa Josiah bent his aging knees and washed goat mud off his son-in-law's car. Nkechi ran inside and vomited. That night, Papa Josiah packed his old gonna-must-go bag. No announcement. No complaints. He just folded his few clothes and wrapped his Bible in newspaper. Nkechi found him sitting on his bed, staring at nothing. Daddy, what are you doing? The old man smiled sadly. My daughter, I have lived long enough to know when I'm no longer welcome. Daddy, please. Nkechi, he interrupted gently, a man who has lost his dignity in his daughter's house has lost everything. He held her hands. You tried your best. But I cannot let your marriage scatter because of me. Where will you go? Back to Umuahia. Back to my small shop. Back to my dignity. Tears poured down Nkechi's face. I'm so sorry, Daddy. Papa Josiah kissed her forehead. Never apologize for another man's wickedness. Next morning, he was gone. Obinna was delighted. Thank God. Now we can finally have peace in this house. But Nkechi stared at her husband and wondered, how did I marry a monster? 3 weeks later, Obinna's phone rang. Oga, the plaza, there's a problem. The foundation is cracking. Serious cracks. Obinna's hands began shaking. That plaza was his biggest project, 400 million naira. But what he didn't know was that this was just the first domino. The first of 3 disasters that would cost him everything. And behind it all was a force he had awakened. When we left Obinna Okafor, the man who forced his 67-year-old father-in-law to wash goat mud off his car, he had just received a phone call that made his blood run cold. His 400 million naira plaza was cracking. The foundation was collapsing. But this was just the beginning of his nightmare. Because when you humiliate someone protected by heaven, you don't just offend a person, you offend God himself. Obinna rushed to his construction site like a man possessed. What he saw nearly stopped his heart. Massive cracks ran through the ground floor like lightning strikes. Engineers stood around shaking their heads like mourners at a funeral. Oga, I'm sorry, the head engineer said carefully. The soil test was not done properly. This ground cannot carry the building's weight. What? Obinna grabbed the man's shirt. Who approved this foundation? Your contractor, sir. The one you insisted we use because he was cheaper. The truth hit Obinna like a slap. He had cut corners to save money. Now demolition and reconstruction would cost an additional 150 million naira. Money he didn't have. But that was only the beginning. 1 week later, Rivers State tax officials stormed his office with a court order. Someone had tipped them off. Obinna had been underreporting his property income for years to avoid taxes. They seized his documents. Froze 3 bank accounts. Demanded 87 million naira in back taxes plus penalties. Who reported me? Obinna sweated like a guilty thief. The officer smiled coldly. We protect our informants, Mr. Okafor. 2 weeks after that, disaster struck again. At 2 a.m., Obinna's phone rang. His hotel manager was screaming hysterically, Oga, fire. The hotel is on fire. By the time he arrived, 3 floors were engulfed in flames. Guests ran out in their night clothes. Fire trucks sprayed water uselessly as the inferno raged. By morning, his beautiful hotel was a blackened skeleton. The fire marshal's report was devastating: faulty electrical wiring caused by substandard materials. Again, Obinna had cut corners. Within 1 month, Obinna Okafor had lost over 600 million naira. Now he was convinced someone had cursed him. Desperate and paranoid, Obinna began consulting everyone who claimed spiritual power. Pastors who demanded offerings for a breakthrough prayers. Alphas who sold him holy water and white cloths. Even native doctors who asked for goats and roosters. He spent over 3 million naira searching for his enemy. But every consultation left him more confused and afraid. One evening, a strange old woman appeared at his gate. She wore all white and carried a walking stick. The gateman tried to send her away, but she insisted. "Tell Obinna that Mama Kelechi is here. He will see me." When Obinna heard that name, his blood went cold. Mama Kelechi was legendary, a prayer warrior from Abia State. People said she heard directly from God. He let her inside immediately. She sat across from him, her eyes piercing like searchlights. "Young man, you are fighting a battle you cannot win." "What battle? Who cursed me?" She shook her head slowly. "No one cursed you. You cursed yourself." "What do you mean?" "The man you humiliated, do you know who he is?" Obinna frowned. "You mean that old man? My wife's father?" Mama Kelechi leaned forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "That old man is Josiah Is. 40 years ago, Mama Kelechi began, I was falsely accused of stealing from the court where I worked as cleaner. I was going to prison. My life was finished. But one court clerk stood as my witness. Josiah Is. He risked his job to tell the truth. Because of him, I was freed." Obinna shifted uncomfortably. "Do you know how many people Papa Josiah helped during his 35 years? How many widows he gave money to when nobody was watching? How many prisoners he visited? How many students whose school fees he paid quietly?" Her voice rose with power. "That man is covered by the prayers of hundreds of people. People across Nigeria wake up every morning and pray for Josiah Is without even knowing why. When you humiliated him, you didn't just insult an old man. You touched someone God is personally protecting." She stood to leave. "There is only one way to stop what is happening to you." "What?" "Tell me. Go and beg him. And this time, mean it with your whole heart." The next morning, Obinna and Nkechi drove to Umuahia in a borrowed Toyota. No driver. No bodyguard. No expensive clothes. Just shame. They found Papa Josiah sitting outside his provision shop, arranging biscuits on a small wooden table. He looked thinner but somehow more peaceful. When he saw them, he stood slowly. "Nkechi, my daughter." She ran to him and wept. Obinna knelt in the red dust. "Papa, I..." But before he could speak, 3 black jeeps suddenly pulled up. Dust clouds rose. Men in expensive suits stepped out. Obinna panicked. Who are these people? One man approached Papa Josiah and saluted respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." Papa Josiah looked surprised. "Justice Nwankwo. Is that you?" The man smiled. "Yes, sir." Obinna's mouth fell open. "Justice? As in judge?" "Yes," Justice Nwankwo said, turning to Obinna. High Court Justice. And this man is the reason I'm not in prison today. He explained, 25 years ago, he was a young lawyer falsely accused of forging documents. Papa Josiah was the court clerk who noticed the real forger's handwriting didn't match. He quietly saved an innocent man's career. I never forgot, the justice said. When I heard what happened to you, sir, I came immediately. Then came the bombshell, Papa Josiah, I've been investigating your pension case. The officials who stole your full benefits have been arrested. You're entitled to 18 million naira in arrears. The word stopped. Papa Josiah staggered. 18 million. Yes, sir. Ready for collection this week. But Justice Nwankwo wasn't finished. He turned to Obinna, his voice cold. Mr. Okafor, I was at your house 6 months ago. I watched you make this man wash your car. I wanted to disgrace you publicly, but Papa Josiah stopped me. So I made some calls instead. To tax department, fire marshal, engineering board. Everything that happened to you was called accountability. From that day, everything changed. Papa Josiah returned to Port Harcourt, not as dependent, but as head of family. Obinna publicly apologized at his church. Changed how he treated workers. Stopped cutting corners in business. Slowly, mysteriously, things turned around. New investors came. Tax case settled. One account unfroze. Not overnight, but steady. 1 year later, Obinna told his staff, my father-in-law taught me that the richest man is not the one with biggest account, but the one with cleanest conscience. Workers stood in shocked silence.